What's going on, fight fans? Hope you guys are enjoying your Saturday. September 13th, big day tonight. Big fight card out in Las Vegas. Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford for all the marbles at super middleweight. Before we get into it, if you're on Facebook, make sure you go over to my YouTube channel, Gen Music 856. Subscribe, like the videos, find something you like, and you know, walk on this journey with me. And if you're over here on YouTube and you're watching the video, go ahead and leave a comment, leave a like, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the prediction and how you think the fight's going to play out. So without further ado, let's go ahead and break this fight down. And then I'll go into some of the fights on the undercard that I'm looking forward to. So let's just go ahead and get to the main event. You know, let's get right to the point. So you have Saul Canelo Alvarez, 63 wins, 2 losses, 2 draws, with 39 wins coming by way of knockout. He's 35 years old, fights out of the orthodox stance, stands 5'7.5" tall, has a 70.5" reach, going against Terence Bud Crawford, excuse me. You have a man who's facing somebody coming out of Guadalajara, Mexico, and he himself hails from Omaha, Nebraska. America, born and raised, from the Midwest, man. 41-0, no draws, 31 of those wins by way of knockout. 37 years old, he fights out of the southpaw stance. He stands 5'9", and he has a reach of 75 inches. And then you go ahead and look at these guys. Let's go ahead and break down where they've been at in their last 6 fights and who they faced and what the tale of the tape is. So you have this fight coming up on Saturday tonight at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. You know, obviously I'm an Eagles fan, but the Raiders, that's my second squad. And to have the first boxing match in that stadium is setting precedent just for having a boxing event there. And then you're setting precedent because you have one man who's trying to defend his undisputed status at 168 against an undefeated fighter for the first time since, I believe, Dimitri Bivol when he fought him. And now you have Terence Crawford, who's a 2-weight division undisputed champion, who's trying to become undisputed for a 3rd time. And that would be the most by any fighter, period. I think Clarissa Shields is a 2-time undisputed champion in the women's rankings. I don't know if she's a 3-time, but either way, Terence Crawford is already in rarefied air, and if he becomes a 3-time undisputed champion, that would be hard to catch up to for any other fighter, you know, coming up after him. So it's quite a lot on the line today. And you look at the last 6 fights from Saul Canelo Alvarez. 2022 in September, he had the trilogy fight against Gennady Golovkin. We won't even count that because he was just getting a paycheck at that point. The first 2 were the ones you want to look at. Then you had John Ryder in May of 2023. That was an easy fight for him, in my opinion. Jermell Charlo, he was supposed to fight Tim Tszyu, and then he got the hand injury. And then his immediate first fight after that injury was the opportunity to fight Canelo. Canelo beat him easily after making him aware of the power early on in the fight. Jaime Munguia in 2024, that was an easy fight for him. I mean, he was a mandatory, but, you know, that was an easy touch for him. Edgar Berlanga in 2024, later in September. I mean, he was never going to win that fight. And then William School in 2025 in May, he was running around for 12 rounds, and it was a boring event, and nobody wants to see that again. I don't think that will happen in this fight, but those last 5 fights, really the last 6 fights, were not difficult for Canelo Alvarez in terms of the matchups. And then you go ahead and look at Terence Crawford's last 6 fights. He fought Mean Machine Kavaliauskas in December of 2019, got the win there. Got visibly hurt at one point in the fight. And then the next fight was November 20th against Kell Brook. He beat Kell Brook. He stopped him actually. And then 2021 in November, he beat Sean Porter. Very, very good fight, and turned it up in the 9th or 10th round when Bomac said he was down on the cards. And then he immediately came out and knocked Sean Porter down twice. And then Kenny Porter stopped the fight. And then you have David Avanasian in December 2022. Um, Solid win for him. And then you have Errol Spence Jr. in July of 2023. That was the big fight that really put Terence Crawford on the map and made people really aware of who he was. And then you had the fight with Israel Madrimov in August of last year in his first fight at 154 pounds. And it was a good competitive fight. I thought he won the fight 8-4. I thought Madrimov was a tricky opponent. A lot of amateur experience, very awkward style, and he showed him a lot of different looks, and it was a very good fight. And I'll get into those fights a little bit more as we move forward. But that's what they've been up to. But the biggest thing for me off rip is that Canelo Alvarez, although the competition hasn't been up to par, in my opinion, he's stayed active. He's fighting 2 times a year, one time in May and then one time in September every year. You have 2 Mexican holidays, so that's pretty much where he makes his bread and butter. And then Terence Crawford, he's pretty much fighting once a year, at least for the past 6 years. He's fighting once a year, more or less. But he stays sharp, and he's not just fighting cans. I mean, you fight a Sean Porter. People want to say he was on his way out. No, he wasn't. I mean, we can agree to disagree for those that don't think so, but Sean Porter's a dog. He's a pit bull. And he was able to turn it up when it mattered. And then you have Errol Spence Jr. People say that he was in the car accidents and the crash, and those things took something out of him. I think that's a fair assessment. We won't really know until his career is over and we see where he is on the other side of his boxing career. But what we do know is that he had a really, really good win over Urdenis Ugas before that Terence Crawford fight. The same Ugas that was able to beat Manny Pacquiao, who beat Keith Thurman. So Ugas was not some shot fighter. And Errol Spence Jr., he broke him down. So Errol Spence Jr. going into that fight, he had some nice momentum. He had about 2 or 3 fights after the car crash. I think one being Danny Garcia and another one being Dennis Ugas. And mind you, the first or the second car crash happened after he had the win over Sean Porter. So, I mean, you say what you want, but Errol Spence Jr. was beating high-level competition regardless of whether people are on the side where they thought he was compromised or whether they thought that he wasn't really that damaged from the car incidents. Either way, even if he was healthy, his style was tailor-made for a Terence Crawford. And Terence Crawford leveraged that stylistic advantage that he had over him. And for me, looking at Canelo Alvarez, I think that the second Gennady Golovkin fight, as well as the fight against Dmitry Bivol, which is probably 1 or 2 fights back from the third Golovkin fight, those really showed you what he can do. One, when he has a very, very good opponent that he has to get up for in that fight, and 2, how he makes adjustments when he has different styles. I thought that he did a decent job against Bivol early, but Bivol, he is a stylistic nightmare for Canelo Alvarez. I don't think a lot of people realized that going into the fight. I was very aware of who Bivol was from years back. I knew about him. I knew about Shabransky. I knew about Beterbiev. So I was actually very surprised when Canelo Alvarez took that fight. And, stylistically, it just didn't go his way. But I don't think that takes away from who he was as a fighter at that point. I think one of his biggest wins where he showed that he was able to deal with a mobile fighter, albeit one that didn't have a great gas tank, was against Caleb Plant. In terms of Canelo Alvarez's foot movement and his feints and his ability to close distance and land the big shots that are game changers for him. And he was able to do that either in round 4 or round 5 for the first time. And from that point forward, I think you saw him gain confidence slower over time. And he just knew that, I'm going to let this guy, wear himself out. empty that gas tank, and then get after him. So I think both guys have had some significant experience in their last 6 to 8 fights, but I think that Terence Crawford has shown me a little bit more in terms of the adjustments, and I think that's going to be the theme of this fight as to who's going to win, who can make the adjustments, who has the better ring IQ. So with that being said, let's go ahead and look at the lead up to this fight. We've seen the press conferences. We've seen when back in July where they both went toe to toe, and Bud tried to walk him down and Canelo pushed him, and then Canelo tried to reassert dominance in the next presser to let him know, yeah, I know you're strong, but this is a different weight class. Know your place, so to speak. So it was some good, respectful back and forth. It wasn't anything nasty. And then this last presser on Thursday night, you had Crawford coming out to boos from the crowd. Obviously, a pro Canelo crowd out in Las Vegas. And they said their pieces. And I thought it was a very good press conference. I thought, again, both sides were blunt about what they thought and how confident they were in themselves, but they were respectful for the most part. But here are some of the highlights from that press conference. At the grand arrivals, Canelo said he was asked this, is there going to be a moment just like we saw against Charlo where he realizes he's in over his head, and he says, yeah, there's going to be a moment. So he flat out said, it might have been to Max Kellerman, yeah, there's going to be a moment where he realizes you're in over your head in terms of the weight class. And on Crawford's side, he walked into boos and he compared it to the atmosphere that he had against Ricky Burns when he fought him in Scotland. And what he said at multiple points, sometimes in front of all the fans and sometimes inside interviews, he said, you're all going to be quiet come Saturday. And in the press conference, Max asked Bomac, how's Bud going to beat Canelo? And Bomac said ring IQ. Without hesitation, ring IQ. And then Bud reiterated that he's going to run upside Canelo's head. And Canelo, for the most part, he's like, yeah, he's sitting there. He's like, yeah, I hear that, but you're going to understand when you get into the ring with me. It's different. And Eddie Reynoso was pretty much like, we've been doing this for 20 years. He's in the best shape of his life, and we're going to try to knock him out. Obviously, we're not going to go for the knockout like a moron and leave ourselves exposed and to getting countered and all these things. But he said, they're looking to stop Terence Crawford at some point in the fight, like they have with every other fighter that has been coming up in weight to fight Canelo Alvarez. So that's pretty much the take from both sides. That's how they see the fight. And with that being said, I want to go into the breakdown, the tail of the tape, the stats, and who I think is going to win. So let's go ahead and break this thing down. So from my vantage point, the weigh-in told me a lot, and I really didn't have a chance to get my bearing on who I thought was going to win until we got to fight week. But at the weigh-in, I think it was Friday morning. Yeah, Friday morning. They both weighed in at 167.5 pounds. Both the same. Terence Crawford looked cut like a bag of dope. Canelo Alvarez looked cut like a bag of dope, but he looked slightly drained and a little bit, just ever so slightly, just a little bit irritable at the weigh-in. So while I don't think he killed himself to make this weight, he's obviously had to put more effort into cutting weight to make it to 168 to the weight limit. And then when they did the ceremonial weigh-in later in the evening, they both looked like they had rehydrated to a certain extent. Crawford looked like his midsection and his torso in general had filled out with some of that water weight. And Canelo looked like he had filled out some with his water weight as well. He looked healthy again. You could see it in his face. And they both had their face off, and that shit was cold, boy. That was a cold face off. Canelo looked like he always does, business as usual. And he just looked at him like, okay, you're just another nameless, faceless opponent that I'm going to have to beat at this weight class who thought they were going to be able to come up and beat me at 168. And Terence Crawford, he also looked cold. He looked like a stone cold killer. He had a similar look to the way that Triple G was looking at Canelo when they both went into their fight. Now, I'm not saying they're the same fighter, but the demeanor was the same. When you looked at Jermell Charlo in both the lead up to the fight as well as in the face off, he didn't have that lion's energy that they talk about all the time. You know, that those Texas fighters have. He didn't have that lion's energy like him or Jamal tout all the time. He looked like he was not happy to be there, but like it was a privilege to be in the ring, and he was going to have to go above and beyond to beat this guy, as opposed to feeling like, no, I'm right here on your level. We're about to go to war. You know what you're walking into. I didn't get that feeling from Charlo. I get that feeling from Crawford, and you can see it in his body language. He just looked like a stone cold killer looking through him. And at one point, Canelo nodded his head, like, okay, we're done here. And Crawford slowly nodded his head, and then before Canelo could turn to the crowd, Crawford turned to the crowd like, okay, we did what we needed to do. I'm ready to go. They both looked ice cold. They looked ice cold, man. I'm really excited for this fight. So going into tonight's fight, let's look at some of the attributes and see where each fighter stands. So keys to victory for Canelo and for Crawford, but we're going to start with Canelo. The footwork. Who wins the battle of positioning as well as where they have their lead foot at? So who's able to win the battle of positioning in terms of, having taking the right angles, and who is able to win that lead foot battle? Because you're going to, at some point, whether it's early on or a few rounds in, you're going to have orthodox and Canelo versus southpaw and Crawford. And whoever is able to keep their lead foot on the outside of their opponents is going to be in a very advantageous position. Because when you have your lead foot on the outside of an orthodox fighter as a southpaw fighter, now you're taking away that orthodox fighter's right hand, his power hand. Because if that orthodox fighter's lead foot is inside yours, now he has to turn his whole body further around to reach you, because it's going to be easy for you to circle out or move out to the right, and vice versa. If you're able to keep your lead foot to the outside of the southpaw's right lead foot, well, now you're going to be in line to deliver your right hand, and that southpaw is going to have to take a risk if he wants to deliver his straight left. So who's going to win that battle? Second key to victory for Canelo and Crawford would be the jab. Who can establish the jab? Obviously, we know that Terence Crawford has a mean jab, one of the best in the business. He's going to have to sting Canelo constantly. And for Canelo, he's going to have to use that jab. And I think he has a very good jab when he decides to use it consistently. But he's going to have to use that jab to close distance from long range to, at the very worst, mid-range, and at the very best, close range on the inside, to be able to really get to the next part, which is applying pressure specifically to the body. Take Terence Crawford's legs away early on. You put in that work to the body in the first 3 rounds, he's going to feel it in rounds 4, 5, 6, and beyond. And then on the flip side, with Crawford, something you don't see many people do to Canelo because they're worried about the counter shots, the body work. As Canelo can take the legs away from Crawford with the body work, Crawford can take the power away from Canelo with his own body work. And then the fourth key to victory, starting with Canelo, is set the pace. You have to set the pace early and show who's boss. You have to show him, yeah, you're good. You're one of the pound for pound best, but this is 168 and this is where I reign, and you're going to fight at my pace. The quicker you move, the faster you'll burn out, and eventually you're going to have to work at my pace, and then I'm going to have you in the doghouse. And then vice versa. Key to victory for Crawford is distance. And distance is tied into leverage. That doesn't mean that you have to stay on the outside the whole fight and run around and get on your bicycle. No. There will be a time to stick and move, but using your distance. And I'm going to go back to the lead foot concept. If you're able to win that positioning with your lead foot, now it's going to make it easier for you to stand in closer and still be at an advantageous angle where it's hard for Canelo to get full leverage on his shots, particularly the three to the body or the head, because if you're on the outside now, it's one, easier to see it coming, and two, you're going to have to pull that hand back further to be able to get leverage on the shot, which is just going to telegraph it. And then that also will make it easier for you to neutralize not just the jab, but that rear four when he wants to throw that one and come through with that looping four. It kind of looks like a cross, but it's really a hook. So using that distance based off of your foot positioning, and then being in close enough where you can use your leverage. And I think that he has the ability to throw short, crisp shots, even though he has long arms. So, again, setting the pace for Canelo, and then establishing proper distance for Terence Crawford. So, with that being said, let's go down the list of attributes. First, starting off with speed. Canelo has very fast hands. He always has. Crawford has very, very fast hands. And I think he has a little more hand speed than Canelo, even at this weight. And just in general, he's a better athlete than Canelo. He's able to move in and out of range faster than Canelo. So I'm going to give that category to Terence Crawford. So that's one for Terence Crawford. Next category is power. And I think that Canelo, this is where he's really going to shine through, because he's not a one-hitter quitter type of puncher, even though people think that. But he has the type of power that will stun you. And once you're stunned, then he'll chop you down at about 2 seconds. So he doesn't have one punch flash KO power, but he has devastating power when he catches you properly, because he's able to place punches very, very well, very accurately. That's one of his superpowers, is placement, and then the power he has, he's able to place that in the spot that's really going to hurt you. Terence Crawford, he has good power, but not the type of power that Canelo Alvarez has. I would say Terence Crawford has more sharp power. Like when Manny Pacquiao would hit guys, he wouldn't knock them out cold at 147. He didn't have that type of power, but he had the type of power where it felt like his fists were going through you. And it would be a reverberating effect seconds or minutes after, like, man, like that hurt more than I thought it would. He has that type of power. But overall, I would give power to Canelo. That's one of the reasons why people would pick him to win, is because he has the power, and he's shown it against guys who are much bigger than him. You know, guys that, even though they can't move as well, they have more muscle mass. But guys like Berlanga, guys like Munguia, they couldn't take those punches, even though they're big guys. Yeah, they're walking punching bags, but still, power is power. So that goes to Canelo. So that's 1-1. Next up is footwork. And footwork, I think that clearly goes to Crawford. Canelo has never had great footwork. He knows how to cut off the ring, but he's never been able to close distance extremely well against the really upper echelon level type fighters, like the Mayweathers, like the Lawyers, like the Dimitri Bivols. So I think that's going to be an issue. Whereas Terence Crawford, footwork is one of the staples of his strengths. I mean, that's what he does well. So footwork goes to Terence Crawford. Defense, I would give the edge to Canelo Alvarez. I think Terence Crawford has really good defense, but I think that Canelo Alvarez has seen more looks. And I think that when he wants to, with that upper body movement and that high guard, he is very, very hard to hit cleanly. It just comes down to, does he have the stamina to keep that up? That's really the only question with his defense in my mind. But in terms of just defense, he takes less risk. I wouldn't necessarily say he's head and shoulders better than Bud. No, I think they're very similar in terms of their defensive capabilities. But Bud is the type to take more risk, and he has that X factor, which I'm going to get to, that makes him more prone to taking chances. So that goes to Canelo. So I have it 2-2 right now. Next would be stamina. That's clearly Terence Crawford. Canelo Alvarez is notorious for having stamina problems and gassing out later in fights. And that's going all the way back to his days where he was fighting Triple G. And that was one of the things that almost was his undoing in the first fight. And he had to fix that for the second fight. And whereas Terence Crawford, not only does he have great stamina, but he tends to get stronger as the fight goes on, especially if you're not walking him down, which is very hard to do. But just in terms of just pure gas tanks, that's Terence Crawford. So it's 3-2 for Terence Crawford. Next on the list is ring IQ. I'm going to give that a push between the two. And I mainly say that because of the next category I'm going to get in, but I think that Terence Crawford has a higher ring IQ. In my opinion, he has a slightly higher ring IQ. But Canelo Alvarez is not that far off. So if Terence Crawford has his ring IQ is an A, I would say Canelo Alvarez's ring IQ is an A minus. They both know how to make a good game plan and execute that game plan. That's why they've been so successful in their careers. But I'll say that's a push. Next on the list would be experience. And I think that this is where Canelo Alvarez really shines through because he's had the experience against a myriad of different opponents at different skill levels at different points in his career. When he was very inexperienced versus where he was very experienced and more of the version of Canelo that we know now. And some of that experience came from the loss against Floyd Mayweather when he was still fighting at 100 and let's say 52 pounds. That was a catch weight for that fight. But he was a light middleweight at that time. And he gained a lot of experience, and you started to really see the upper body movement become a part of his game after fighting Floyd Mayweather. Yeah, he would move his upper body, but he started really becoming slick and really taking in a lot of those little tactics that Mayweather would use in terms of rolling with the punch and moving his upper body and getting his head off the center line instead of just coming forward with the high guard. And I think that the experience against really fast guys like Erislandy Lara and guys who are awkward like Austin Trout and guys who really have a great sense of distance and timing and a great jab and great combination punching like Dimitri Bivol and a guy who's a walking, talking Terminator in Triple G, all those things, so much experience. Whereas Terence Crawford, through no fault of his own, doesn't have the same level of experience because I think that the promotion was an issue. And a lot of fighters wanted to avoid him at those lower weight classes. So when people look at his resume, they say, who have you fought? Okay, well, the people that he could have fought, how many of those guys wanted to fight him? So the little details that people leave out, I think that's very important. But that being said, that doesn't change the fact that Canelo Alvarez still has more experience against a wider range of skilled opponents than Terence Crawford has. So although Crawford has experience in terms of not having many close fights, right? So even though the level of competition isn't as high as what we've seen with Canelo, very few, if any, of Crawford's fights have been close. The closest fight we've really seen was against Israel Madrimov. And even that fight wasn't really super duper close. I think it was just, we're so unused to seeing him have a tough fight that people just automatically assume that it was a close fight or that he lost just because somebody gave him a few problems. But if you actually look at the fight objectively, after a certain point, Madrimov was very hesitant to engage with Terence Crawford. And that's usually because, one, you can't figure out what the guy's doing tactically, which I don't think was the case, or two, the power is bothering you. The power and or speed is bothering you. I think it was the latter, not the former. So, but overall, I would give Canelo Alvarez the edge in experience. I think that's obvious in my mind. And then, so that makes it 3-3. And then last would be X Factor. And that X Factor I would give to Terence Crawford. Because I think Terence Crawford, and I could be wrong, which would make my whole prediction wrong, but I don't think that Terence Crawford is as small of a guy as people are assuming that he is. There's been so much evidence that, one, he walks around much heavier than people realize. I mean, he walks around at about 180 to 185 pounds when he's not in fight camp. and Canelo probably walks somewhere around, I don't know, 190, maybe 195. I don't know, but just looking at his build, it looks like he's a little heavier, but it's not different worlds, is what I'm saying. And Terence Crawford, he walks around in the 180s, but he's fighting at weights as low as 135 pounds earlier in his career, and 140, where he was undisputed at. And then he became undisputed at 147. And even in the fight against Earl Spence in 2023 in the summertime, Earl Spence looked visibly drained trying to make that weight. But if you pay attention, Terence Crawford also looked like he had issues making that weight. Now, part of it was him being sick. He said he had a cold or an illness going into fight week that cleared up in time for the fight. But he's also having to really drain down far to make that weight. And when you're going from 180 all the way down to 147, you're not just cutting water weight, you're cutting muscle. So that's not just going to compromise your punch power, but it's going to compromise your punch resistance because you have less water around the brain, because the majority of brain fluid is made up of water. And then you also have less punch resistance because you're going to have less muscles or supporting muscles around your neck area to help take away some of the effect that you're going to get from whiplash when you're trying to take a punch or roll with a punch. You're going to have slower reaction time because you're dehydrated. You may rehydrate after the weigh-in, but in comparison to what your healthy weight is, you are dehydrated. You're not supposed to be at that weight, and you're cutting muscle. So you're just not going to be as strong physically and in terms of your overall resilience at those weight classes. And it's not just Terence Crawford that deals with that. Is most fighters, including Canelo. I mean, we saw a similar thing with Canelo versus Floyd. We saw a similar thing with Oscar De La Hoya versus Manny Pacquiao. They had to drain to a point that they did not anticipate they would be in a bad spot with, and they paid for it. And you can just see the little things like the reaction time, the punch resistance. You're just a half a tick slower when it comes to reacting to the jab coming your way. All these little things that people don't think about, especially if they don't fight, if they've never been in a sanctioned fight, whether it be at an amateur level or whether it be professionally. These are the things that matter. So I think that Terence Crawford is not only going to be stronger fighting at this weight class, but he's not really going to lose much of any speed because he's just going to be getting closer to his healthier weight. I think he's more of a middleweight. I think he if you gave him another few months or a year, he would acclimate well to 160. I think that's more so his natural weight. 168, I don't know. And I think that's what makes this fight so intriguing, because we don't know how he'll take the punch. But if he can take the punch, he has a lot of things stacked in his favor. So, but X Factor wise, I think that he's going to be stronger than people realize. And there's a lot of evidence to support that. I think I've talked about that in other videos. The wrestling background, the overall country strength. You're walking into a gym and deadlifting 400 to 500 pounds with your street clothes on. You have to be very strong to do that. I don't know if people realize that. And then you're doing that when you're weighing probably anywhere around like 150 to 160 pounds. Let alone at your actual walk around weight. I mean, he's insanely strong, and so is Canelo. I just don't think that the separation is going to be as wide as people expect it to be. Like Amir Khan, he was a blown up welterweight. You could see he was top heavy. He was carrying all this water weight. He looked bloated, just like Marquez did against Mayweather, and that's not functional strength. Functional strength. That's just you carrying around a bunch of muscles you put on real quick, or a bunch of water weight, or dirty bulking, if as they call it. You're not going to be able to carry that once the bell rings. You actually have to move with that weight in a way you're not used to. Because Canelo's not going to sit there and let you go at your own pace. He's going to make you react in ways you're not ready to. And now that extra weight drains you a little differently than it did in training camp or during sparring. Same thing with Jermell Charlo. He put on the muscle, but he didn't put on bone density. He didn't put on that muscle in a healthy way. He didn't have it redistributed evenly across his body as opposed to just being top heavy? Or even if you distribute it somewhat decently throughout your body, have you gotten acclimated to the weight? Have your ligaments and tendons gotten acclimated to the weight? Has your bone density increased to a point where it's sufficient to allow you to carry that extra muscle on your frame? I think that Terence Crawford did that in a very calculated and very intentional way over the past year. So one, he only fights once a year anyway, and instead of taking his time and maybe being a little more lax during his off season, he spent all that time very methodically and intentionally putting on that weight, slowly but surely getting used to it, running up in the mountains with that weight, sparring with the weight, playing with his kids, and throwing the football around, or whatever the case may be, with that weight, living with the weight. Living with the weight and getting used to it that way is a lot different than just putting it on during a training camp. It just is. If you're putting it on over a year, it's a lot different than putting that weight on over 3 or 4 months. It's just not enough time. That, along with his mean streak, when he gets hit, and he will get hit because this is boxing, can he take the punch? Because if he can take the punch and it doesn't spook him, not concern him, but spook him, then we all know he has that mean streak. And if he feels as though he can take that power, then is a whole different ball game. So overall, I have Terence Crawford winning this fight by decision. I don't see either fighter getting knocked down or knocked out. Well, knocked down, I couldn't say, but I don't see either guy getting knocked out. But if there were a stoppage, if it were by Canelo, I think Canelo can knock out Terence Crawford and or stop him. But I also believe that Terence Crawford can stop Canelo. I don't think he is going to knock him out because Canelo, that granite chin is legendary. But I do think that he can stop him because he has that placement, and that's part of the X factor as well, that placement. I don't think people realize I don't got to hurt you like I hit you with a Mack truck to stop you. All I got to do is hit you with shots that make you very hesitant to want to come in for more. And then over time, I may not knock you out. I may not break your jaw, but I will lump up that eye and make it hard to see. I may cause a cut. I may go to that body and make you not want more. All these little ways that where weight doesn't make a difference. Where it comes down to is, can you take the kitchen sink that Canelo's going to throw at you and be able to say, I can do this for 12 rounds? That's the question. That is the question. But I think that Crawford's going to be able to answer that because I just don't think that he's as small of a guy as people are making him out to be. So my final pick is Crawford by decision. And here are the things that I'm looking for in particular. Like I said earlier with the keys to victory, first thing to watch out for is foot positioning, especially with the southpaw facing off against the orthodox fighter. Because when you're southpaw, now when you want to throw that jab, if I'm able to have my right foot outside of your lead left foot, now I can neutralize the forward because you're going to have to cross your body to reach me. And now I can really focus in on the jab. And we've seen him do this against Jose Benavidez. I think we saw him do this against Sean Porter as well. When you throw that jab, I'm already not really looking for the forward. And if you throw it, I'm going to be able to react to it because it's coming from such a long distance, and you're going to have to cross an odd angle across your body to get to me, especially if I start moving out to the right. And then if you throw that jab, now I can slip it and throw that two and catch you. Now I can catch you with that straight left and make you pay. That's something that Manny Pacquiao made his bones on, getting outside of that lead foot and then being able to really haunt you with the feints and then eventually that straight left coming down the pipe. So the foot positioning, and then conversely, Canelo's going to have to know that. That's why he's bringing in guys like Boots to prepare for things like this. And then the southpaw stance. You can exit out from Canelo's bread and butter punch, which is the lead hook. It doesn't matter if he's throwing lead hook to the head or if he's throwing lead hook to the body. If I'm able to get outside foot positioning, now I can start to make it harder for you to land that three. You're going to have to loop that three a little wider to get to me, especially if you're throwing it from distance. And then with the long legs, now I can get my foot, the front of my foot near your heel, so I can step in closer to get into range to really kind of like smother that hook, as well as still feel safe enough that I can get away from you if you come with that forward, because now I got that angle on you. And then the traps, the check lead hook. So Crawford's lead hook over Canelo's three, because the three to the body, I'm looking with my elbow with the long forearms to cover that three to the body, because it's going to come right to the floating rib or right to the kidney. That's where you're going to, if he's not able to land clean, Canelo's going to start going to that kidney just to try to catch you on the way out, like he was catching Arislani Laura, just to try to give you something to think about. I gotta get some pound of flesh. So that's where it's mostly going to be going. You catch that if you can with the elbow, and that, so when you have the long forearm, now I can just be looking up top for that three up top, because what Canelo likes to do, and part of that is him having long arms for his size himself, he'll start throwing that punch from the same slot. The bicep moves, and then he can decide whether he's going to whip that hook upstairs or whip that hook to the body. So he has a longer window to make that decision. And that's part of the reason, along with his quickness, why he was able to catch Edgar Berlanga with that knockdown with his four, let alone the three. But like, he's able to throw the hook up top or to the body from the same arm slot. That is what is really unique about Canelo. But setting those traps, having the foot positioning, and having those long forearms help you to neutralize that a little bit. So we'll see how that plays out. But that check three over the opponent's three, that's going to be something, because Crawford can do that from range. And then the leverage on the shots. It might have been against Mean Machine. I'm trying to think of which fight it was, but or maybe even Sean Porter. Terence Crawford can throw body shots without leaning forward over his front foot or having to jump in to close distance. No, he can just stand there, feet planted, just whip that hook just like Canelo does. The only difference is that Crawford has longer arms, so he can throw it from distance. Nobody really goes to Canelo's body because they know what's coming back, and what's coming back is some nasty work. So people tend to stay away from his body. A very good example is the Triple G fights, the first two. Triple G, for as great as he was, he did not go to the body much, if at all, against Canelo. One, because Canelo was the smaller guy. He had faster hands, faster feet, and, comparatively. And he knew that if he missed on a shot to the body, there's going to be some heat coming back. What happens when a fighter is willing to go to Canelo's body with those punches, knowing that they have the distance to stay away from danger from Canelo's own return fire, as well as being able to throw it without having to lean off balance? So that's another thing to watch out for. And then Canelo's legs. He usually has to plant those feet to really get leverage on his shots, like the full leverage, the type of shots that you knock out a Billy Joe Saunders with by breaking the eye, or the type of shots that you drop a Berlanga with the rear four, or the type of shots that you are able to drop an Austin Trout with, or even hit Austin Trout with a jab. Like, he planted that feet. It's the feints that get him into position for that, but he usually has to plant his feet to really get that spooky power that he can deliver. So if he's not able to plant his feet and he's being turned left, right, and every other way, like we saw with Mayweather and Arislani Laura, or even Dimitri Bivol, that's something that he's going to have an answer for. I'm talking about Canelo, because you better believe that Terence Crawford is going to be doing that, and if it's working, he'll wash, rinse, and repeat that tactic all night long, and there won't be anything Canelo can do against it. So again, this is why you bring in guys like a Boots Ennis, who has really good feet, really fast hands, gives you a decent semblance of what you're going to see with Crawford. Can you really replicate him? No, but Boots Ennis, that's a hell of a fill-in for a Terence Crawford. So overall, I think that Terence Crawford is going to be able to win this by decision. This is such a close fight because again, it comes down to, in my mind, if Terence Crawford can take that power and not be spooked by it. If he gets concerned by that power or gets hit with some body shots early, then I think that Canelo can start to build some momentum, and then I think that he can have a strong chance to win this fight. But if he's not able to land his shots with leverage, and or he lands a few shots and Terence Crawford is taking them like he did against Madrimov, and he's not visibly shaken, um, I think that Terence Crawford's going to win this fight. So I'm picking Terence Crawford by decision. Let me know what your prediction is and how you see the fight going. And let me go ahead and get into these last undercard fights. There's two in particular that I'm really interested in on this undercard. One is with Fernando Vargas Jr.'s son. Fernando Vargas' son, Jr. And he's going against Caleb Walsh. Caleb Walsh being one of Dana White's fighters that he's promoting, and Fernando Vargas Jr. obviously being the son of the legendary Fernando Vargas Sr., who was a firecracker in the early to mid 2000s, and he was knocking people out. I think his first loss might have been against Shane Mosley, but until then he was just running through people, and he had a fiery personality. He had dynamite in his hands, and I was looking at Fernando Vargas Jr.'s training clips, including his open workout, and I mean, it's just kind of clear, like, he has more hand speed than Walsh. I think that he's overall has a higher IQ. I think Kalen Walsh is a very, very good fighter, but I think that when you're facing a guy who can do a lot of the things you can do fundamentally, but then he has the physical talents on top of that, then it's a tall order to beat a guy like that. So I have Fernando Vargas Jr. winning this super welterweight bout against Caleb Walsh. They're both undefeated. Vargas Jr. being 17-0 and Caleb Walsh being 14-0. But I think that Vargas is going to pull this one out. I'm looking forward to seeing that fight today on the undercard. And then we have Christian Mbili, the number 3 ranked super middleweight, I believe, by the WBC, going against the sparring partner, one of the sparring partners for Terence Crawford for this fight, in Lester Martinez, the number 12th ranked fighter in the WBC rankings, I would assume. I'm looking at this on BoxRec. So, and Billy being 29-0 and Lester Martinez being 19-0, both of them have power. So this fight is going to be fireworks. Hopefully it lives up to the billing. I think that Lester Martinez, very, very good power. I think the defense is solid, but needs to get better. Whereas in Billy, I think that the power's there, the stamina and the gas tank is there, but his defense is a little tighter. And I think that this, in my opinion, may be the case of Mbili being able to get to Martinez first, as opposed to the other way around. And that's why I have Mbili defeating Lester Martinez for the WBC interim World Super Middleweight Championship. So, hopefully one of these guys, the winner of this fight, is next in line to get a fight against a Canelo Alvarez. I don't think it's going to happen, but you would think that this fight would put one of these guys in line to get a shot at a title at 168. Because I've just learned about Lester Martinez recently because I heard he was training with Terence Crawford. But in Billy, that dude's a monster. I've been known about him. He beat the dude Murdoch. I can't remember his first name. He's a tough customer, man. But he was all over that dude when I saw that fight, and that's what really put me on him on my radar, man. Keep an eye out for Christian Mbili and also Lester Martinez. And then last but not least, this is not a big fight on my radar, but I'm mentioning this because he's also in Terence Crawford's camp. He's a training partner, Steven Nelson. 20 wins, 1 loss, going against Rico Santana. Hopefully, I didn't get the first name too wrong. 12-4. So I think this is a get back fight after his loss to I can't remember the dude's name, but he's super sharp. He wasn't going to beat that dude. The guy was tall, he was rangy, he was sharp, he was faster, younger. So that was a very tough fight. It was a good fight. He didn't win it, but he definitely showed up to go to work. So hopefully he can have a bounce back fight against Santana, and we'll see if he wins this. Let me know who you have winning some of the undercard fights that I mentioned, including the Vargas and Walsh fight and the fight between Mbili and Martinez. And then also what you think about who's going to win between Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford. With that said, I'm going to get up off of here. But first, let me go ahead and read these comments. There's actually a lot of comments that flooded in while I was talking. What's going on, Shan? Appreciate you being here. Uh, Myth was like bad memories, the last Canelo fight. And then you said stand like Ray Charles with the comment section. Yo, you hilarious. Well, yeah, I was going off on my tangent, man. I apologize, but yeah, let me know what you think either in the comment section below or on the video. Who do you have winning this fight? And if you're putting money up, how do you think that's going to play out? You're going to make money, you're going to lose money? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.